Hi, welcome to Sabbath School Daily, where we have been studying from this lesson right here, God's Mission, My Mission. This week we're studying from lesson number 11, which has the title, Mission to the Unreached, Part 2, and today is Tuesday's lesson, which has the title, Tyre and Sidon. They say that our attitude is more important than most of the other human expressions. As Martin Luther used to say, our attitude determines of what spirit we are, and it will also determine the limits of our influence upon other people. Our attitudes often determine our ability to influence others. A harsh, cruel, and unfriendly attitude is going to drive people away from you. And even if you are able to witness, your words, no matter how truthful, are much less likely to be received. But in contrast, a positive attitude and belief in others draws them to us. It creates a bond of friendship. Jesus stated this principle beautifully when he said, "No longer do I call you servants, for a servant does not know what his master is doing. But I have called you friends, for all things that I have heard from my Father, I have made known to you." That's in John 15:15. Friends accept one another in spite of their weaknesses, their mistakes, and freely share their joys and sorrows. The story that we find in today's lesson is of the Canaanite woman found in Matthew 15, verse 22 through 28, and also Mark 7, verse 24 through 30. She is, to all appearances, treated quite harshly by Jesus. Her request to him was for the cure of her daughter possessed by an evil spirit. Matthew identified her as Canaanite, but Mark adds an additional information, an additional detail, and calls her Syrophoenician. Jesus' words seem hard, but the woman did not see them as such, at least not enough to dissuade her of her mission. To the modern reader, it might seem inconsistent with Jesus' characteristic, but his ministry of healing was mostly confined in Palestine to the Israelite nation. The question that arises in this story is, why didn't this woman feel offended by what Jesus said? Well, she was determined to claim the blessing that she was seeking. That's why. We truly don't know the attitude of Jesus' words. He could have said these words with a wink in his eye, encouraging her to persist. The written word preserves the spoken words, but it cannot communicate the tone of the words, the inflection, the subtleties, the nuances. Perhaps his tone encouraged her to persevere, to move on. The Greek word that's used for dogs here is a diminutive word of endearment. Little dogs, and that softens the blow of his statement. What we see here is another moment where Jesus educates his disciples by saying something to this gentilic woman that no other rabbi in Palestine would ever say. Matthew 15:28 tells us, "O woman, great is your faith." Her faith in him provided immediate cure for her daughter. And as in the other instances of faith found in the Synoptic Gospels, as in the centurion from Capernaum, for example, the healing happens without direct contact, over a distance. An additional detail that the lesson emphasizes is the distinction between how Matthew describes the story and Mark. You see, Matthew is being directed to a Jewish target audience, and Mark is being directed to a Gentilic target audience. And so in Matthew, we see that the author is really creating a shock factor for the Israelites, for the Jews that are reading the story in his book. You see, they would never expect Jesus to treat this woman with any kind of civility, with any kind of kindness. They would never expect him to minister to her as he did and actually answer her request. They would expect him to react as he initially did. And so as Jesus does that, as he is harsh, and again, we don't really know the tone of his words, we don't know the nuances, the subtleties, but as he reacted that way, that's what they expected. That's what the disciples expected, as we see in the text. And yet Jesus, he completely changes his course of action because he wanted to create a contrast between what they expected and what he actually did. But in Mark, we see a different shock factor because those people, they could relate to this woman. They could see in this woman, as the lesson describes, a mother who cares for her daughter, who is worried for her daughter. I really like what the last quote of today's lesson includes. It comes from the book, The Desire of Ages, page 400, and this is what it says. Christ did not immediately reply to the woman's request. He received this representative of a despised race as the Jews would have done. In this, he designed that his disciples should be impressed with the cold and heartless manner in which the Jews would treat such a case, as evidenced by his reception of the woman, and the compassionate manner in which he would have them deal with such distress, as manifested by his subsequent granting of her petition. Please study today's lesson. There's a lot to learn here in this story. There are a lot more details and nuances to this story than what we talked about here together. So look up the Bible verses, look at the different texts that are mentioned, compare them, look at the contrast, and grow in that. I'm sure that the Lord will lead you. Please comment down below with any questions or any comments. I'd love to interact with you. And also, please remember to like, to share, and to subscribe to our videos. That really helps us get the word out there. And I hope to see you again here tomorrow for another Sabbath School Daily.